Donald Trump and President Biden campaigned in Georgia over the weekend after a big leadership shakeup in the Republican National Committee. A longtime Trump ally was elected as the chair, and his daughter-in-law was named co-chair. CBS News campaign reporter Zak Hudak joins us now from Washington to help break down what's happening with the RNC and the campaign trail. This is not new, Zach. I mean, going back to the 1960s, there were a lot of people who were surprised and in some cases unhappy with then President Kennedy's choice of Attorney General, which was his brother. Before he became president, his whole family worked on his campaign in a variety of roles. But the question becomes now in 2024, how is the former president's influence in the RNC shift the committee's capabilities for supporting other GOP candidates, including ones that are not so supportive of Donald Trump?
Vlad, there's a couple things. One of the concerns that I've heard from a number of down-ballot campaigns from more battleground districts is that in the past, the RNC has paid for Donald Trump's legal bills. Now, they're not currently doing that. They've not done that since he became a candidate, and we're told as of now that's not the plan. However, that does change how potential donors view donating to the RNC. That is going to be in their mind that this money might not be used necessarily to elect candidates, but to protect Donald Trump, even though that hasn't officially happened yet. So that is a concern. Another concern is simply the loyalty test that Donald Trump puts out. He is very ready to cut off and to criticize people even within his own party, and that is definitely a concern, particularly for down-ballot candidates that are in purple districts who might occasionally have to differ from the former president on a policy. They are concerned about how this could affect the support they get from the RNC.
So help us sort of understand, create the context for us. Traditionally, what is the relationship between the candidate and their party's national committee, and how is that shifting with Trump?
Well, Anne-Marie, you guys hit on this accurately, that it's not that out of the ordinary to insert loyalists at the RNC if you are the incumbent, if you are the nominee, if you previously were the president. I mean, this kind of was already the case with Ronna McDaniel in the previous leadership committee there. The big shift here I see is simply that Donald Trump has taken it a step farther. He has said, those folks are not loyal enough to me. He was, we've heard over and over again, pretty upset with Ronna McDaniel for even allowing other Republican candidates to hold debates. He did not participate in those debates, as we know, but it just brings the threshold up another level of just how loyal you need to be to Donald Trump to have the RNC's support and to exist as a Republican in politics today.
But Zach, this is sort of, I guess, what is confounding to so many people. Loyal to Donald Trump. I mean, these people were. Ronna McDaniel, she changed her name or got rid of the Romney name so that because Trump was unhappy about that.
Wow.
Right? And so you do sort of almost everything short of debasing yourself. And sometimes that's not enough. And when it's not enough, he goes after you as if you were always in the never Trump camp. And so I wonder for just people who are sort of watching this, who are still in that camp of like, I'm loyal to Donald Trump, do they ever worry about that? Because that is a sort of an occupational hazard.
Vlad, you are hitting on something that they worry about very frequently. It is really a no-win situation for a lot of these folks. And I think the way they look at it is sort of like, well, I could have him turn on me now or maybe turn on me down the line. If he turns on me now, my political career will end now. If I stay apparently loyal to him, if I do all I can to have him not turn on me, maybe by the time he would have done so, he's already left politics or has already moved on to other things. I think that's usually what the calculation is, that it's really what is the least harm we can have inflicted on our political profile by Donald Trump.
Sounds like a revolutionary France after the fall of the monarchy. But yeah, sorry, Anne-Marie, go ahead.
Let me ask you about one more thing before we let you go. No Labels has also said that they're going to continue to move forward with a third-party candidate on the presidential ticket. Do we have any idea who this person could be if they pick someone? Is Mnuchin still sort of lurking around there?
I think that's a possibility, and I think the reality is the people who would have been the most likely candidates, like Joe Manchin, have already taken their names out of consideration, at least publicly.
I said Mnuchin. I meant Manchin. Sorry, not Mnuchin.
He says that he is not interested in it. I wouldn't be surprised if No Labels is trying to convince him behind the scenes. I think they're in a bit of a tough spot. I think they were hoping that things would materialize a little bit more, and I think they haven't been quite as organized as they needed to be to have the impact they hope to have. That being said, there are a lot of folks in politics who deep down really like to be president, and I wouldn't be surprised if they convince someone who can have at least a little bit of an impact. I know it's something that Biden's campaign is a little bit concerned about. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that No Labels found someone who can have at least something of an impact.
All right, we'll be watching. I know you will as well, Zach. Thank you very much.